So long ball number 2 is Mauricio Pochettino reportedly urging MLS teams to release players for January camp. And like he said, I mean, the Pochettino needs to source center backs from somewhere. So is MLS the talent pool where we're gonna find the World Cup 2026 center back duo?
I don't. So this is just like every other January camp. Restrain your expectations. Don't get too wrapped up in who gets called. Don't get too wrapped up in whether any of these players are sort of the future. I mean, for the moment, now things can change between now and 2026, but it's not a crazy amount of time between now and then and a World Cup on American soil. And I think we're all pretty sure that the vast majority, probably nearly every player that's going to suit up for the U.S. men in 2026 is going to be based in a foreign league, in a European league, more than likely. And you could throw in an Alexandre as a possibility who would be based somewhere beyond Europe. But I do think that there's always something to be learned here, and it'll be fascinating. I do think, maybe for me, it is even a meta question. It's even a question of whether or not Pochettino gets the full buy-in from Major League Soccer teams. And the story that we're referencing here comes from Dougie McIntyre. Sorry, I call him Dougie. I know that guy. I call him Dougie. His name's Doug. He probably doesn't really love me diminutizing him or whatever that word is.
Well, I call him D Money, so to each his own.
Oh, I call him Dougie Mac, but you can call him D Money. He's got a couple of rap names, is what we're saying at this point. Anyway, his story says that he went to MLS Cup in Los Angeles last month. He met with Nelson Rodriguez. He's had discussions about we need the commitment from MLS teams to allow their players to come to January camp, because there have been instances in the past where MLS teams have said no, thank you. And that's largely based on early season competition. So the Champions Cup would be the biggest issue here, I think, for releasing players. So we're going to find out, whether there is anybody who says no, thank you to Mauricio, or if they all just jump on board. And again, I don't know that you should be excited necessarily about any of the names. Some of these names are going to be names you already know, right? Is there a chance that Zach Steffen is back in the national team roster after some time away? Is there a chance that we see Jesus Ferreira, who just is about to get a move to Seattle? Is he at that level? I mean, you wouldn't say Jesus Ferreira is a first 23 player for the U.S. men's national team in a meaningful competition if everybody's available. He's not. But
he went to the World Cup 3 years ago?
He did go to the World Cup, but that's what I'm saying. Everybody's moved on. Jesus Ferreira's not good enough. Look at what happened at the World Cup. He's not good enough. Fine. 5 goals in MLS last year. That doesn't scream national team player. But I don't know that you could maybe make an argument that Pochettino should just go completely young and shake the trees and see what he's got. The problem with that, of course, is, as I said, there's a limited timeline and limited windows. So if you are calling up extremely, and there are examples of players that have already done some things that are still young and not yet blooded. Diego Luna comes to mind. Like, I think everybody's going to freak out if Diego Luna can't make a January roster.
There's something seriously amiss, or like he has recused himself or something if Luna is not on the January camp roster. I mean, is there big international calendar conflicts for Real Salt Lake this spring? Are they in CONCACAF Champions Cup or anything like that?
I mean, no. Okay. I don't think there's any reason for Diego Luna to be held out of this camp by Real Salt Lake. I don't think that is there shouldn't be any justification for that. Because if he wants to be a national teamer, Real Salt Lake benefits from him being a national teamer.
Very good point.
Because of his profile, shop window, all that stuff. And they are in the Champions Cup. They actually play their first Champions Cup game on February 19th against the Argentine of Costa Rica. So they do have that to get ready for. And that's a couple weeks. It's a couple weeks earlier than. I mean, the camp was January. The games coming up for the U.S. men's national team against one of them is against Costa Rica, as a matter of fact. And trying to think of who the other game is. Maybe you can look it up for me, Rob, while we're on the fly here.
You're a one-armed bandit today.
I am. I don't have all of the typing ability that I might normally have. But you have, again, it's
I got it
Costa
for you.
Rica. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on January 18th, USA takes on Venezuela.
Right.
And then a few days later, on the 22nd, it's Costa Rica.
Venezuela, Costa Rica. So those two games, again, 4 days apart, end of January. You'll have a week, 2-week camp, roughly. 11 days. January 7th, they would report to the camp. Again, that's coming up early next week, and then the games. So a player like Luna, whose team is participating in the Champions Cup and has a game on February 19th against Argentine, would miss whatever camp time Real Salt Lake has ahead of that opening game in the tournament. How big of a deal is that for Mastroeni, for Real Salt Lake? I mean, I think we are always caught in between as national team fans and American soccer fans. Whereas, I mean, it doesn't matter to me personally whether Real Salt Lake does well in the Champions Cup. It doesn't matter to me. But there have been times, of course. Well, look, there's still this idea that we're all kumbaya, holding hands, we're all together, arms across America to support MLS in competitions like the Champions Cup, because, again, this reflects on American soccer as a whole if MLS teams do well in the competition. Therefore, we want to put our best possible teams in it, or we want to have our teams at their best possible level when they go and play in this thing, which is not properly timed for MLS, right? This is one of the reasons why the calendar change is out there as a conversation, because MLS goes into something like the Champions Cup and they suffer from the fact that they are not in the middle of their season. They're just getting started. Players aren't really up to speed yet. Fitness isn't there, et cetera, et cetera. Those are excuses, but they're actually legitimate things that MLS has to deal with. So here you have, okay, do we want our best players with our national team program to get ready for the World Cup on home soil in 2026 under our Argentine manager who really wants to be able to put this team together and do something? Yes. Do we also want our MLS teams to be at the best level they can possibly be when they go into the Champions Cup? Also, yes. Can you do both things? Probably not 100%, right, Rob? Probably can't do them both, not 100%. So, these are tough decisions. And again, if Pochettino is asking MLS to give him complete buy-in, then that means a player like Diego Luna from a Champions Cup team in Real Salt Lake will miss the lead up to the Champions Cup for his team in 2025.
Just as a little bit of a wrap up to this topic, do you remember any coaches previously, like making a point to ask for availability like this?
I think all of them have done this, and I think all of them have handled it, in a, hey, this is the national team, it's a big deal. I mean, they've all asked for it. Whether they sort of have the gravitas to really push, I think is a different question. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at history. I know that Atlanta United has denied call-ups a couple times during January camps. I know that's happened. I believe Miles Robinson missed a January camp because Atlanta United specifically said no, thank you. I'm sure it's happened. Maybe Seattle has done it as well. There have been some teams that have done it. Obviously, that would have been under Berhalter during the last administration, and then we've had Bruce Arena, we've had Bob Bradley, we had Jurgen Klinsmann. I want to say that Jurgen Klinsmann got everybody he wanted, but I can't tell you that without going and doing the research. But it is certainly a question every single January. And of course, it'd be easy to just dismiss this thing. Oh, whatever. What is this? Why are we doing it still? January camp? There's no international window. None of our better players are here. Why are we even bothering? But I think there will always be benefits to the coaches getting together, being able to, even if they're not working with the players that they would have in an international tournament or in a meaningful window, they still can talk about those things. They can still process what's going on there. I know they're talking all the time, but to be in a soccer environment, and maybe there is a diamond, or maybe there is a player that suddenly becomes interesting to Pochettino who can play a role, because you're going to have injuries, right? And I think I'm not saying anything crazy when I say we would all prefer the U.S. men's national team be players that are playing in one of the top 5 leagues of Europe. That would just be better. But there are going to be situations where that's not possible all the time. And there will be situations where a player who is 21, 22, 23, and maybe on his way to Europe is still an MLS player. Get John Tolkien a look. Had a really good playoffs last year. Helped the Red Bulls make a final. Is John Tolkien long for the Red Bulls? Probably not. Give him a look in January if his move isn't coming to the summer, or if his move comes, maybe it comes in January and he has to leave. I don't know.
We shall see. Mauricio Pochettino's first January camp roster set to be released early next week.